Hey y'all, it's Pastor Laura. I'm actually sitting in my backyard. This is the view I have as I write sermons for you each week. And so I decided, since we are doing digital sermons, I would give you the view that I have as I compose sermons for you. So what a week it's been for us. Not just COVID-19 and all of the restrictions and quarantines and social distancing, but just the news that I'm going to be moving to McAllen. A lot of y'all have been asking when that is. That's going to be June 28th or July 1st. I hear different things from different DSs, but my last Sunday at Bee Creek will probably be in May sometime. So we have time together, and I want to talk with you about that. But as I prayed, I thought, man, there's a lot of fear right now about this pandemic, about the disease, about what it means, about the unknown. So this Sunday, instead of talking about all this going on with me personally and us as a church, I thought we'd talk about the world situation. And then next week, we'll talk about, I'm losing my voice, we'll talk about the move, and we'll talk about how God guides us to right paths, and how right paths aren't always easy, but they're not hidden. So that'll be next week. I'm just putting it off 1 week. I hope that y'all like this choice. So what is it? Actually, let me read you a scripture. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. When you think of what's pursuing you, what is it that you think about? And these days, if we're honest, we might say, well, we're afraid. Fear is pursuing us. Disease is pursuing us. The unknown is pursuing us. In more normal times, we might say, well, it's my past, my guilt, my sin. It's what I drag around with me all the time. When we feel chased by these things, by fear, by disaster, in more normal times by our past, we try to protect ourselves. We try to cope. And so you'll see a lot of that coping in the grocery stores. It's, what imperfect hands can do. What can my hands do to ward off this fear, this disaster, this disease? Well, I can get some canned goods and get some supplies and maybe build a wall of toilet paper, whatever it is. What's on our heels is sometimes so terrifying, and we can feel so powerless before it. But do you know what God says to those who feel pursued by demons of fear and want and lack? God says, perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with torment. When you're part of God's flock, He drives the fear away and sends something else to follow you all of your days. Goodness and mercy. Goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. This week, as we experience what I feel like is an unprecedented moment in our history, I prayed about what to say. And God said, well, just skip to the end. I'm like that in books too. My family teases me that I always I skip to the end and I read that. If I like it, then I'll finish the rest of the book. And the good thing about scripture is God gives us the ending. Always. We know that it's a happy ending. And the end of this psalm declares that, right? Goodness and mercy follow me all the days of my life. Not some of them, not when the sun is shining and everything's right, goodness and mercy are following me, but every day of my life, goodness and mercy are following me, and I will dwell in God's house forever. Here, in this lifetime, and then in eternity. To read this ending first means that we're reminded that God drives away the fear and the disaster and sends goodness and mercy and love to take its place. What follows you today, tomorrow, and forever? Goodness and mercy, put there on your heels by God. And I'm reminded of my campus pastor. His name's Max Mertz. He's retiring this year. That just tells you how old I am, I guess, that he was my campus pastor. One of the most memorable sermons I've ever heard was about this topic. And he said he was praying about what this meant. How is it that goodness and mercy follow you when clearly we live in a world that has a lot of pain and suffering and fear? And he said suddenly as he prayed, he thought back to his childhood and how he had visited his aunt. And his aunt had these two little yappy dogs who were very joyful and not at all bitey, but they were his playmates. And the parents and the aunt would send him out in the backyard with the dogs to play and to make a fort and to do whatever for hours. And he loved it because these little guys would follow him everywhere. Everywhere he went, they were always on his heels. And sometimes he'd try to give them the slip, like to get away from them or to jump up really high or to run. And so he said, I'd try to do a circle and then a reverse circle and just see if I could give him the slip. And he never could. They were always right there. He said at the end of the day, they, after following him through the whole day, because they just loved him, they would curl up in his lap and they go to sleep. He said that's what it means for goodness and mercy to follow you. It's like the most joyful, exuberant little dogs ever following hard at your heels all the time. And that's an important message to remember because this past week, much of what we rely on to feel safe, the stock market, the stability of the economy, our jobs, even the grocery stores, they're all shaken. They're going to be okay, but they're shaking. And we're feeling some of the losses, okay? We're feeling a little bit of that, maybe more than a little bit of that uncertainty. And the voice of evil whispers to us at these moments that we better start being scared, that we better be afraid. And evil whispers, God can't see you through. You need to figure out how to protect yourself. That's a lie. That's a lie. God made this world, and He made each of you. And best of all, He loves you. And what does He set on your heels, promising that they'll be with you every day of your life? Goodness and mercy. I know it gets harder to hold on to this when we're going through trials. It's one thing to see the outlines of goodness and mercy when life is good and things are rocking, but it's harder when life is tough. And what I want you to remember is that ancient flocks traveled through all kinds of terrain. There was the green pastures of the home range, and then there were the caves that they went into. The shepherd called them into to obtain water. There was the impenetrable darkness that they sometimes went to, the impenetrable gloom. There were steep, terrifying mountain passes. There were times when predators were all around. And yet, at the beginning, the sheep say, I shall not want, right? And at the end, the sheep proclaim, goodness and mercy will follow me all my days. Like they're saying, no matter what, I'm not looking at the terrain. I'm looking at my shepherd. As long as I keep my eyes on Him, it's going to be okay. And I want to remind us that being a part of the flock of the Good Shepherd doesn't mean we'll never face trials, times of darkness, deep caves, times like this. This is part of life. But it means that we don't have to be afraid, that we can choose to rely on God's love, to look to Him, and not to the terrain around us. And some of y'all know that last year in the fall, I lost a friend of mine. He's a member of this church. His name was Dave Hart. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when he was early 50s, teenage daughters the age of my girls. And as you know, if you know pancreatic cancer, you know that that's a devastating diagnosis to get. And Dave was a man of faith, and he was confident in God's goodness and mercy and love. And so as I watched, I saw that, he didn't completely do a 180-degree turnaround, and suddenly quit his job and stop doing all the things that he was doing. What he did was he said to his wife and his daughters, I want I want this life. It's good. And I want laughter and stories and joy and family and friends as long as I can have it. That's what I want. And so he got treatment, of course, and he prayed, but he was showing up at basketball games and soccer games, and he kept his job. And I'll tell you that everybody who saw him during those times, we ended up being the ones who were uplifted just by being around Dave. And after about 18 months, the cancer did spread. It went to his brain and he collapsed, and he was in the ICU. And I remember visiting him, and of course, everyone is just, Dave was an amazing person. So there were a lot of tears. But then Sue said, Dave wants stories and laughter. And so the daughters and one of their friends is there. They start telling stories about this road trip that they went on recently. These confessions about grease down sinks and crazy stuff. And basically, I was worried that the ICU was being so filled with laughter that the nurses were going to come tell us to quiet down. But I actually wasn't worried because I knew that's what Dave wanted, and that's what did his soul good. The amazing thing was that Dave knew and trusted the Lord. And so every time you saw him, not only could I perceive that goodness and mercy were following him through one of the toughest times of his life, but I felt like they were poured into me as well. If you ask anybody who talked to him during that time, they'd say the same thing. So goodness and mercy then, this is the final idea for us, is that they're not just for us, for our benefit. They don't just follow us so that we can be enriched, but they overflow to the people around us. And boy, does the world need that right now. We need to be the flock that is pouring in goodness and mercy into this very anxious and troubled time. And I found out something amazing about sheep. Well, this part is not amazing. The thing that we all know is that under poor management, sheep can be some of the most destructive livestock you've ever seen. Like, they can totally ruin fields and destroy them for use for the next 10 years, maybe even 20 years under poor management. But here's what I didn't know. I didn't know that when they are properly managed, sheep are some of the most beneficial livestock you can find. Ancient literature calls sheep them of golden hooves. That they have golden hooves because they have such a beautiful effect on the land. If they have a good shepherd, then everywhere they walk, the land is richer for it. Can I say that again? When sheep have a good shepherd, everywhere they walk, the land is richer because they were there. I found out sheep like to rest and ruminate on high ground, and that means their manure is there. And so what happens is they feast in the valleys and in the verdant places, and then they travel up to the marginal high ground where things are more scarce to rest and ruminate. And what they're doing is they're transferring the richness of the valley up into those marginal arid spaces. So they're enriching the land that would never get that kind of benefit otherwise. And that's pretty cool. They also, as we've talked about, they like to eat weeds and things, but they not only eat things that are bad for them, they are great at ridding the land of invasive species that threaten pastures. So thistles, if you've ever been in a farming family, my husband Kevin comes from a farming family in Kansas, and his father would screech to a halt in the truck and grab his hoe from the back if he ever saw a thistle, because they're so invasive and so difficult to eradicate. Well, not if you have sheep. Sheep will eat them up. So sheep leave beauty and vitality and life in their tracks. And think about it. They're not, really striving to make this happen. They're not struggling. They're not thinking, how is it I can enrich things here? They're just living under the care of their good shepherd. And just because they're there as a natural outgrowth of their life Kind of like how Jesus says we will produce fruit when we abide in him. That's natural. You don't have to struggle. It just happens when you are close to your good shepherd. So, friends, in this time of disaster, in this time of panic and fear, and I know it's real, and we need to take the precautions that we need to take to stay healthy. We need to listen to our officials. But you and me, we can stir in goodness and mercy. We can check on the 5 households around us, our neighbors over there and across the street and back behind us, and pick a catty corner one, right? Check on them and say, can I pray for you? You can call them, or you could go stand at their front porch and stand 6 feet away, and say, can I pick up supplies for you? Is there medicine you need? Is there something I could do, right? Something that still keeps that distance but helps you, help somebody else. If we all do that, all 600 of us, if we just check on our neighbors, what is that? Thousands and thousands of people that we're taking care of? That's goodness and mercy, right? That's helping other people not to panic or be afraid. We can call people. There are at least 3 right now that I know of, people who have an affiliation with this church and who are isolated to their rooms in a nursing home. And wouldn't it be amazing if we just called them every day? What would that be, 30 minutes, 10 minutes a call to just check on them and help them not be so alone? Maybe you know of somebody else who needs that kind of love. We can share what we have. We can deepen our prayer life during this time. I'm posting daily devotionals, video devotionals for you on Facebook. So come be my friend on Facebook and you'll get one every day. We can have FaceTime prayer circles. We can have Zoom conferencing prayer circles. We can have Bible studies online. We can really use this forced isolation to deepen our spiritual lives. And we can support struggling local businesses. We can call to check in on people. We can show our faith. Most of all, we can stop being afraid. It's not disaster or destruction or disease that are following you all the days of your life. It's goodness and mercy. God has tied them to you with unbreakable cords because you are his. So do not be afraid.